Welcome to Chinwag Tuesdays, your passport to a world of language and culture.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Chinwag Tuesdays. I'm Amanda and today's extra special guest is a 2-time Guinness World Record holder, an author, a speaker, a mental health ambassador, a professional Ironwoman, a dietitian, an inspiration not only to women in sports but to women in general. Bonnie Hancock, or Bonnie Palmer as her married name. Bonnie and I have known each other since our school days, and I'm incredibly proud to be interviewing her today. So thank you so much for being here, Bonnie.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Oh my gosh, it's been so long since we've seen each other. You grow up together at school and in surf life saving. And yeah, congratulations on everything you're doing too.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel like it's just a little speck in the ocean compared to what you've achieved.
I like the pun. I have spent a lot of time in the ocean in the last few years, as we'll get into, but no, it's so great to reconnect.
Thank you. So maybe we can start off by doing a very quick self-introduction, just where you're from. Obviously, we're from the same area, but yeah, a bit about that and, your most recent achievements.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in the tiny little Coffs Harbour town of Sawtell. So it's in New South Wales, population 2,000. So it's probably, I guess you could say, not halfway between Brisbane and Sydney, but I guess that would just be an easy way to put it for people who don't know Australia very well. I grew up by the ocean. So I think it was the age of 5 I joined surf lifesaving. As early as I can remember. I think I could almost swim before I could walk. I was a true water baby. So from the age of 12, I wanted to be a professional Ironwoman. So that's the competition side of surf lifesaving. So if ever you've swum at a beach with flags, the red and yellow flags, surf lifesavers are who keep you safe. We watch out for you in the water. There's then a competitive side of that. So there's 20 Ironmen and 20 Iron women that make that professional series every year. It's very competitive. At the age of 17, I moved to the Gold Coast, which is the hub of surf lifesaving, surfers' paradise. It's obviously a very popular beach. I moved up here to try and chase that goal, and I managed to achieve it and become a professional Ironwoman. And I did that for the next 7 years. So that's 3 times a day training. It's running, swimming, it's paddling a board, which is, I guess, similar to surfing in a way. You paddle a ski, which is similar to kayaking. It's very demanding. I then switched to ski paddling around the age of 28. So that's more of speed and power, and a 5-minute race out in the ocean, again, paddling one of those kayak type craft. But as COVID took over the world in 2019, it, I think, shut everything down. I don't even think for that year we had any races. There was about 15 races and everything was just cancelled. So my whole year of competition was cancelled. We were in lockdown, stuck at home. And I happened to go to the library, and I love the library. I'm a super nerd. I love reading. And I picked up 3 books. And in that pile of books was a book called Fearless. It was about Freya Hofmeister. She's the German woman who paddled around Australia in 2009. And I got about a chapter into reading this book, and she was talking about sharks and crocodiles chasing her. But I just had a gut feeling like it was something I had to do, paddle around Australia. I'd never grown up wanting to break a world record or even dabble in ultra endurance. And for 6 months, I went back and forth trying to convince myself of all the reasons not to do it. But eventually I imagined myself as an 80-year-old woman not having done it. And I had a sick feeling of regret. And I thought, I'd rather give this a crack and fail. And what's failing is at learning something about yourself. 2021 December, I set out and I paddled my ski around Australia, and I returned 8 months later as a new world record holder.
Oh my gosh, I could cry. I love it. I love this story so much. I actually am. Oh my goodness. It's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful story. And I just finished reading your book yesterday. So emotional. We'll get into that in a little bit, but things that you achieved, the things that you went through, the challenges you faced, my goodness. So 254 days, nearly 13,000 kilometers. And how many on that trip? It was the 2 records you broke?
It was. So I never anticipated the 24-hour record, but basically it was born out of necessity. So Australia has some incredibly remote coastline. I would be dictating by where the islands were, where it was safe to anchor. So I had a 38-foot support catamaran with me. Sometimes I couldn't get within 100 meters of that boat for all day of paddling. So it was incredibly
Yeah.
lonely there. But basically the skipper would say to me, look, the islands coming up, they're either 90 kilometers away, 120 kilometers away, or 150 kilometers away. And I would have a choice to make. Sometimes I would get halfway through the day and he'd say, I know you'd planned 90 kilometers. We actually have to go 30 kilometers more because that island's no longer safe to anchor at. So I was
Oh my
entirely
gosh.
dictated by Mother Nature. So there was
Yeah.
certain times on this trip where I had to paddle all day to actually get to a safe spot. And I thought,
Yeah.
hey, I know the world record's 150 kilometers in a day. Why don't I see if I can maybe better that? And it
Yeah.
took 2 months to get down to the waters of Western Australia. That's where I first broke that record. I did over 150 kilometers. And by the time I got around and coming back down near Queensland, I was actually able to paddle 213 kilometers in 24
Yeah.
hours and set that new record. So
That's
I'm
incredible.
incredibly proud of that. When I got home, I
Yeah.
found the men's record was 228 kilometers. So I set out 2 weeks after my circumnavigation. I went back up to a place called Townsville in North Queensland and I paddled 235 kilometers to get that outright record. So I thought I'm never again going to be conditioned in my body to actually sit in the ski all day because you don't have
Yeah.
back support, right? So you've got to condition your muscles to actually just be able to sit in the ski all day. So incredibly
Yeah.
proud of you.
Yeah, that's amazing. I laughed so much when I read that part in the book. And I think I saw it in an interview as well, that when you found out the men's record was that you had to get out there and beat it. And good for you. Because
Thank
and
you.
again, we'll get to this in a bit into the interview, but like the kind of criticism you got was mostly from men. So for you to
Oh,
get out there and be like, I'm going to beat this men's record as well. Screw you all.
absolutely, and I thought once I had made it 3/4 of the way around, I was in Darwin, which is at the very top of the country in the Northern Territory. And, I got to Darwin, I'd paddled almost 10, nearly 10,000 kilometers. And we were at a bit of a fundraising event on a rooftop. We were trying to raise funds. We were trying to find a boat to get me across the Gulf of Carpentaria. So when you look at the map of Australia, as you know, there's two chunks missing. Great Australian Bight underneath, the Gulf of Carpentaria at the top, and I chose to cut straight across. So it took me
Yeah.
up to 500 kilometers out to sea, but I'd managed to become the first person to cross the Great Australian Bight on a ski. I'd gotten 3/4 of the way around, and I had a man look at me and say, there's no way you'll get across the Gulf on that tiny little surf ski. It just can't be done. But what he realized was that would then become my fuel while I was this far out to
Yeah.
sea. Was, riddled with crocodiles and sharks. And it just
Yeah.
becomes fuel if you choose to use it that way. You can go either
Yeah.
way. There'll always be criticism when you're doing something that's never
Mhm.
been before. And I learned to actually use that to continue to build
Yeah.
my arm resilience.
Yeah. And in the book, you had said that at this exact situation in Darwin, that you wondered that if you were a man, would he have the same reaction? So
Yeah.
did you notice a lot of other comments similar to this, either online or in person, that had you wondering if you were a man, would you face the same criticisms?
Oh, 100%. I've had
Yeah.
dozens, if not hundreds of comments along that same track. I'm surprised how small you are. I'm not physically small for a female, but that's what I get. I'm surprised how small you are because I think they expect someone who's 6'5", with huge shoulders. I mean, I'm 5. I'm not particularly tall for an Ironwoman or a paddler.
Yeah.
I always say I'm actually not a naturally gifted athlete. I've had to work really hard and always work hard person
And
next
I've
to me.
seen that. I've seen that from when we were
Right,
kids. Yeah,
right.
definitely.
And same with yourself, you can probably relate to that too, right? Like when we're not physically, gifted, there's some girls who are well over 6 foot, they've got a huge reach with their stroke. Even academically, I've always had to study really hard and I love study, but that's just been me from a young age, that work ethic. And I think it actually
Yeah.
serves you really when you get older, when you become an adult. There's no one sitting there saying you've got to do your homework, you've got to do the extras, you've got to do these
Yeah.
extra sessions, etc. That's on you. So
Y-
it serves you really well. And also,
Yeah.
I started school a year earlier, so I was the last to be able to tie up my shoelaces. I was the last to get my pen license, and I used to get so upset by that as a young kid.
Mm-hmm.
Back now, and I'm like, I just had to build that resilience so young. You got to work for everything you get.
Yeah, definitely. Now, you also mentioned in the book that, like, throughout the whole book, actually, and throughout the whole expedition that you did, you were updating social media. And, you went through periods where you didn't have any network. But when you came back, there was lots of messages and comments of support. But of course, with the support comes negativity. And there were some pretty nasty messages and comments that you got from people saying that you'd get eaten by a crocodile and all this kind of stuff. So how did you learn to deal with that? Or handle it? Because I guess you kind of just have to deal with it. But how did you learn to handle it?
Totally. It's such a good question too, because you're right. Like I would be out of range for 3-4 weeks at a time. And husband and crew were helping me with the socials. So they were sort of on land seeing these socials come through. But in saying that, there were times where they were out of reception on land as well. So my husband and crewmate Ben were driving the jet ski. And when you're in places like Western Australia, you might go a day or two without actually any reception. So there was this particular time where there was some really nasty comments online, and they didn't see them until a couple of days later. And what had actually happened, a lot of my supporters had jumped on to defend me, and it was getting really nasty. Or I would sort of look at them, I would take the time to read them, absorb it. And honestly, I think at the start it used to really affect me. I would say I'm naturally quite a sensitive person. Like I'm an empath, and it's probably taken me my whole life to sort of realize that. And I'm always, kind of thinking of others and how they might feel. To some degree on this paddle, I had to learn not to be a people pleaser. I had to learn to put aside, and I had to learn to go, you know what I'm doing, not everyone's going to be happy with that. Not everyone's going to be happy the fact that the record will probably be broken, because the person who had the record, she had a lot of supporters too. And we found out it was a lot of them jumping on, later. Yeah, right. And, people might not just be happy that it's a young female maybe breaking a stereotype of what they might expect. So they'll question. Some people might just not like that you're going against the norm and doing something that they don't think is possible. And that could feed into their own insecurities. And I always think that if we find our own happiness and our own passions, and you feel so good within yourself, that radiates out and you're so happy for others.
Yeah.
No, I just learned to get that thick skin, and it really did kind of bounce off me sometimes or fuel me. I learned either way. And I learned to channel, often when it was really awful, to channel that into my paddling. And the beauty with this paddle was every day I was facing so many physical challenges. I had to keep moving on.
Yeah.
Writing the book was a very cathartic experience. It allowed me to sit there and digest what I'd done, finally give myself a pat on the back and appreciate it. And it was beautiful. And I found myself sobbing at the end, writing the last
chapter. That's where I cried, was the very last chapter. I think the epilogue, when I was in tears.
I'm glad that came through to some degree. Sorry about the crying, but I basically, I wanted to finish this book, and I thought, okay, I've got to finish this perfectly. And for 2 weeks, total writer's block, couldn't think of where to go with it. I went out in the ocean, I went for a paddle, and then it hit me and I sprinted in. And I was like, I know exactly how I'm going to finish this book. And I wrote that in an afternoon. So I think I'm
incredible.
Inspired or find things that inspire you and then create when you're in that mood.
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting, the point that you said that, like, usually these kind of comments you get comes from insecurities of the person. And that's something I've noticed as well. Like, I've been on social media for a couple of years now, not even just with Aussie English with Amanda. I have like an account, a public account about my life in India, and that attracts a lot of criticism too. I'm also very much an empath and sensitive person. And at the beginning, it would be really disheartening and really upsetting. My husband's Indian, so I would get like a lot of comments from other Indians about that. And he'd be like, just ignore it, just ignore it. Now he's like, no, you have to name and shame them. So now I name and shame comments. But I have started to kind of have the same thoughts, in that a lot of the time it comes down to people's insecurities and jealousies. That's really where it comes from.
100%. I think the name and shaming can be good because it can be good to hold people accountable, because I think so
Yep.
many of these people do sit behind a fake profile.
Yep.
You just think, where's that sort of anger coming from to actually direct that
Yes.
at someone? And again, it just because it challenges their beliefs or their norms or what they think is
Yeah.
the stereotype, right? Question things. It's good to,
Hmm.
challenge the norms and be yourself and chase your
Yeah,
passions. Yeah, you grow through it. You grow through something like,
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So out of the records you broke, which was the most memorable or which is your favorite?
So I think that when I got that 24-hour record, the 213 kilometers, so the story to that was I broke the 150 multiple times. I did
Yeah.
170. We posted that up on social media. And then I started getting criticism that that wasn't actually a record, that the record was 201. But they got confused because it was a different record that was set in the flat, calm, in a kayak. So it's
Oh,
actually
right.
Guinness World Records on the flat is different to open water. So I had
Sure.
multiple people questioning that, saying the record's actually 201. And so tying into what we just said, I said, oh, well, now I'll have to go out there and beat 201 as well. And I knew that the first chance I would get, I would paddle further than 201 kilometers. And this
Yeah.
day came where it was just, I went into a laser-like zone of focus, and it was in the Gulf of Carpentaria. Oh, sorry, it was back down the Queensland coast. We'd done the Gulf.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
just panned out to be this day where I felt like something special was going to happen. I did 213. And though
Yeah.
I technically had the record prior, it was actually beating that flat water record as well.
Yeah.
That was really special. And that was just
Yeah.
an example of choosing to step up above the criticism. And the funny
Yeah.
thing is, never ever heard from those people ever
Okay, you
again.
didn't. I was about to ask that. Did they say anything? Of course not. No.
Never again. No.
Their words got stuck.
Absolutely. And I think the other really special moment was when I saw the Gold Coast skyline for the first time. I knew we had the record in the bag. I beat it by over 2 months of circumnavigation. And all I wanted was one day off before our farewell. And I had to paddle so hard in the weeks leading in to get this one day off, because I had to cover this ridiculous amount of kilometers. And it was
Hmm.
to the Gold Coast, and knowing I had one day just to reflect and spend with my crew.
Yeah.
I went and got a little bit of pampering done.
Yeah.
You are, yep. And then sinking my toes into the sands of the Gold Coast when I actually crossed that line. It was so special, and being
Yeah.
reunited with people for the first time in 8 months, and just having that beach full of all of my best friends and supporters was.
Yeah.
I still can take myself back there, because the strongest memories are those that are tied to emotions. And so those moments
Yes.
of time are so clear in my mind still. It's really special.
Yeah. I had to laugh because I saw like one of the documentary snippets on Instagram where Matt was being interviewed, your husband, and he had said like he's not scared of you quitting. He's scared that you won't want to stop and you'll do too much, which is exactly what
Right.
happened on the first day, wasn't it?
Absolutely. So we had a clash on the first, and it's exactly, he was being interviewed prior. So, it was sort of ominous, like he knew what was coming. And this
Yeah.
first day, it was like I was still, as I write in the book, still so focused on external validation. And I knew the
Yeah.
entire like surf ski community, surf life saving community were following the journey on Strava. For those that don't
Yeah.
know, Strava is an app where you track your kilometers and distance in exercise. So we were using that to track how far I was paddling. And the option was to go to Byron Bay or Ballina, which is an extra 20 kilometers. And it's 73K to Byron Bay. And I remember thinking, oh, it's probably not that impressive. If I'm able to get near the 100, people will look at that and actually take me
Mm.
seriously and know how far I
Yeah.
can paddle. That was day one. And I can tell you that from day one to day 254, my mindset was completely different in the end. It didn't matter to others, like what others thought. I paddled to be smart, what I thought was the distance that day. If it
Hmm.
was K into a headwind, that's okay. But on that
Yeah.
first day, I was trying to get me to stop at Byron Bay, and I was yelling back, I just want to go to effing Ballina. And so we had this complete clash. He ended up winning. I came into Byron Bay. I pretty much wasn't talking to him. I was so mad. I was still in athlete mode. And all he was trying to do was look after me. And he was so right. I was incredibly
Yeah.
stubborn. I had to learn to listen to my crew, to take on the opinion of
Mhm.
others when it was, needed.
Yeah. So you mentioned Matt's thoughts of the idea after like you'd read the book and you said, I think I want to do this. I think I can do this. But what did your family think when you told them? Family of athletes, like high performing athletes, what were their reactions?
I know. I just remember all of them didn't know quite what to say. And I remember that it was like a stunned silence. It was the same with my family.
Yeah.
Biggest It's hard for them to get their head around the crocodiles. They just couldn't
Yes.
fathom me climbing into the water with crocodiles. And it's such a valid point because for those that don't live in Australia, a third of our coastline is inhabited with saltwater crocodiles. They've been around since the dinosaur era. They start from Broome at the top of Western Australia, right across to Townsville at the top of Queensland. There's only one way to do this paddle, which is to cover every kilometre of coastline. There's no cheating it. There's no cutting it short. So I had to accept the fact that when I got to WA or near the top of WA, I'd be climbing down into my ski in crocodile infested waters. And that's the part that they were really scared about. And I'm really
Yeah.
glad I started on the East Coast, though there were sharks following me from day one. I could get my head around the sharks. I'm a surf life saver. I've seen them out there in the water.
Yeah.
As much as you hate seeing them, I've had sharks come up to me. I've seen lots of fins. I had great white encounters on this journey, but it was the thought of a crocodile coming up to me once they decide to attack. Got not much, chance there.
Yeah.
They're they're predators, they're patient, they'll stalk you. They won't particularly attack you upon first seeing you. They'll actually suss out whether it's going to be worth it for them. It's really scary. They can follow you for 100 kilometers and you don't even know they're
Yeah.
there. So that was the bit that concerned them. That was my biggest concern. And the strategy was always to keep our speed up, to never sit idle in the water and
Yeah.
make yourself as hard a target as possible and head a long way out to sea as well. That was the advice we were given.
Yeah. Yeah. So which was scarier, shark territory or croc territory?
Definitely crocodiles. I tell you, I didn't know prior. I was like, I'm not sure. I did have a great white come up next to my ski in Western
Mm.
Australia. So I was paddling. I was 80 kilometers into the day of paddling. My crewmate Jamie was on the boat. And this is detailed in the book for those that have read it or those who might. And I got to the end of the day. I had a really good song going in my ears. I'm listening and Jamie's calling me into the boat. So we always had someone on Bonnie watch. There was always someone watching me. So Jamie was watching me this day. And I was like, yeah, I'm coming in. I thought he was calling me in for food. I hadn't eaten in a while. And then he sits up straight and desperately calls me. And I got this feeling, this gut feeling, something's not right. I sprinted up to the boat. He said, get on right now. And they didn't tell me until that afternoon, once we'd motored to safety, that they'd seen a great white come up next to my ski, the big jagged fin, disappear and deep dive under my ski, disappear completely.
God,
They
oh, it gives me
waited for it
goosebumps
to
thinking
come
about
back
it.
up. Right. And I'm like, yeah, I'm getting there, like paddling on my ski. And they're like, get into the boat right now. And the thing with this paddle is you've got to get back in the water in the exact same spot. So with Guinness World
Yes.
Records, you've got to start and stop in the exact same position. So the next day I had to climb back into my ski in that spot where he'd seen the great white. So just knowing what's in those waters, what can be underneath you. And again, like I didn't even see that happen. So I'm
Yeah,
sure there were lots of sharks we didn't see along the way as
exactly.
others we did.
Yeah. Was that captured on footage, the shark? Was that something that they filmed on the documentary or no one was filming?
They caught one shark encounter in the docos. So there's one that's tailing me, a fin, and we did catch that. And there's one under the water that I sighted. So that's in there. There's some shark encounters. The great white in Western Australia wasn't on camera, but
Yeah.
it's very footage, the ones that they did capture. It's from a GoPro under
Wow.
the water that I
Yeah,
saw.
wow.
And there's also crocodile footage in there as well, which was the first one I saw in the Northern Territory.
Oh
So it's
gosh.
all in there, croc, shark,
Yeah.
seasickness, and also the beauty. Like we live in a beautiful country. It's coastline
Yeah.
like never seen before. And every country has its beauty, right? As well as its harsh coastline. So it'd be
Yeah.
the same in India. Like it's just
Yeah.
there's so much variability in every country. And that's what I love
Yes.
it. And we really wanted to capture that.
Yeah. I actually used to live in Darwin. So I lived in Darwin for 2 years. God, how long ago? 10 years ago, over 10 years ago now. I spent 2 years out there. So it was really, really nice to kind of hear you talking about Darwin and going to the different, like, was it the surf club or one of the clubs where you
Yeah. Yep.
had the function? Yeah,
Yep.
because I know all of those places. That was really, really cool. And when I moved to Brisbane from Darwin, I drove. So I drove from Darwin to Brisbane, spent some time in Townsville and drove down the coast. So I've been to Townsville. So yeah, it was really interesting to hear all of these different places you talked about.
Oh, isn't it the most spectacular coastline? I think often that, the top of Queensland across the Northern Territory,
Hmm.
it's spoken about enough. And, it's
Yeah.
probably to some degree they want to keep it as a bit of a hidden gem. The Kimberley region, in the Northern
Yeah.
Territory, out by water to
Hmm.
experience. Oh, and the heat as well, like a heat that I'd never experienced before,
Yeah.
32 degrees in the water, 45 degrees under that
Yeah.
searing sun. And that made paddling incredibly difficult. So I had to do a lot
Hmm.
of paddling in the cooler conditions. But in saying that, you're climbing into crocodile territory at night time. So just the challenges and figuring out the logistics of the Northern
Yeah.
Territory. And that's where your crew is so incredibly important. And it can be incredibly isolated coastlines. So also those debriefs at the end of the day, because
Yeah.
sometimes all day without seeing another single soul. So having your core crew there is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. The first half of the book, not really the first half, but up until chapter 6. So that's when you're kind of in athlete mode. You were really just thinking that you had to paddle, recover, eat, rest. And you kind of felt a little bit envious because your crew was getting out and like swimming and enjoying the beautiful sights and scenery, and you felt like you couldn't. So during the process of creating the documentary and having a look at all the footage, did you find looking back on that you were able to appreciate the journey from a different perspective because you could see it from their eyes? Because obviously in that moment you were kind of, I think, tunnel vision on the journey itself.
Oh, it's an amazing question. It's actually something that someone pointed out the other day in the doco. We captured it and hopefully captured it effectively, that the first sort of same thing section of coast, really the eastern coast down to the start of the Bight, I was tunnel vision. That footage is very serious and raw and shows the physical challenges. And there's
Mm-hmm.
not a whole lot of coastline. It's really dark kind of colors and it's very intense. And then
Mm-hmm.
once we get to Western Australia and we meet Godie and Ryan, our gold digger guardian angels, the cruising Kiwis,
Yeah.
colors are bright. There's the pink lakes of Western Australia. There's drone footage of white sandy beaches and turquoise water, reefs,
Wow.
dolphins and whales. And it's exactly how the journey went, that for the first couple
Mm-hmm.
of months, I barely looked into shore. I was such in a tunnel vision mind, that typical athlete mode. And then I realized that I was missing out on these amazing sights. And really, the best part of the whole journey wasn't actually the
Yeah.
record. It was the experiences and the moments and the coastline and the people around me. And once I came to that realization, it was only through a conversation I had with one of my crewmates and telling
Mm.
him how much I was struggling, and him saying, the opportunities are there. You've just got to take them. And this
Yeah.
one particular day where I was paddling, and again, I was tunnel visioned, and these caves popped up in the middle of the ocean. They popped up. And I looked and thought, that opportunity is there and I'm going to take it. And I said to Jamie, who was on Bonnie Watch, you want to come explore the caves with me? And we went exploring into these caves. We had to go a K-off course, which I never would have done prior. First
Yeah.
day. And from that day on, every time the crew jumped into the ocean at the end of the day to look at the turtles or dolphins or
Yeah.
seal, I would go with them. And then physically, my paddling got better. So it was really
Yeah.
interesting, obviously, mentally, when we're
Yeah.
stimulated, when we're enjoying things, we perform better
Mm-hmm.
physically as well. So it was a good lesson
Yeah.
learned.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. And so, to those who don't know, the Great Australian Bight is basically like that, the ocean of water in between the bottom of, is it Victoria and Western Australia, like the two
Yep.
points?
Yep. Actually, South Australia is the last point
Oh,
of land
right. Yeah.
I had. So
Yeah.
underneath Victoria, you've got the Bass Strait, which leads down
Yes.
to Tasmania, and then that leads into the Great Australian Bight, but pretty much the whole bottom of the country, really, you
Yeah.
could call it the Great Australian Bight.
Yeah.
And no one had done it before. So the four prior to me had all hugged the coastline. So I
Yeah.
had to make the choice. Would I save 1,000 kilometers by cutting straight across, but have to go 500K out to sea to do it? So when you see it on the horizon, for anyone who's been on an Australian beach and looks at the horizon, it's 40 kilometers you can see. So I was on this journey 100K out to sea most days, and I would have to go
Yeah.
100K out to sea. So that's no land in sight. It's water so dark you can barely see under it. Incredibly
Yeah.
scary. And there's killer whales out there in those waters. So
Oh,
just the thought of it was overwhelming. But my crew said,
yeah.
we've got this. We can do it. And I
Yeah.
trusted them and I trusted myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the first kind of point of contact in WA once the bite ended was Door Island. So what is the first thing that came to your mind when you finally saw Door Island after being out on you were out on the bite for what, 2 weeks?
Yeah, 13 days in
Yeah.
the end.
Yeah.
So 14th day we came into Door Island. Just honestly, and I write about this in the book in detail, when I got there, I was so overwhelmed with relief. I actually gave all my crewmates a hug, and then I went down to my cabin. I shut the door, I sunk down on the floor and I sobbed. And I just
Yeah.
sobbed, letting out all of the emotions of being, all of the fear that I had for those few weeks, everything I had to keep inside.
Yeah.
We'd done it. And the next day was absolute ecstasy. We climbed to the top of the island. We had a beautiful moonrise, sunset and a moonrise. I looked
Yeah.
out over the water that I'd paddled, the stretch of water that I'd paddled in 2 weeks, and thought, we did that. And I just had this feeling like we conquered the bite. When I first got there, I just remember that just overwhelming relief. And then the ecstasy was the next day. And
Yeah.
my crew as well had just went through so much. None of us could find the words at the time, and it probably took me 2 weeks until I could really
Yeah.
talk about that experience properly. And then
Yeah.
in writing the book, again, it was really intense to take myself back into that moment
Yeah.
and read it all again.
Yeah. Yeah. So during these 254 days, most of the time you're very isolated from the world. You're in your own little bubble. I know that you took that one day off before paddling into the Gold Coast to kind of pamper yourself and become mentally prepared. But was it still overwhelming paddling into the Gold Coast, knowing that the whole country was watching? Sunrise was there, the breakfast channel, like knowing that you'd be facing people again. Was that still overwhelming after being isolated for so long?
Absolutely. And life out in the ocean is so slow. Being that far
Yeah.
out to sea, there's no sounds out there other than the wind and the ocean and maybe a squawk of a bird every now and then. The only birds that far out to sea are muttonbird and albatross. So you
Yeah.
see the creatures out there, maybe dolphins surrounding you. You really become like a creature of the ocean. And then at the end of the day, it's your crew. So to think that there'd be hundreds or thousands of people suddenly wanting to talk to me, it's like I lost the ability to socialize in that time. It was almost like
Yeah.
Big Brother was just our crew, and oftentimes we didn't even need to use a lot of words when we were living
Yeah.
these experiences. It was just really such a level of minimalism in a beautiful way that you just stripped it back to where you sometimes didn't need to say much at all. So to have to learn how to socialize again, to have to learn how to walk on land properly again. My lower body had deconditioned bright lights in rooms, used to sort of startle
Oh,
me, loud
true.
noises. So crossing the
Yeah.
road and cars and all of those sounds. That first day back, I'll never forget, I was sort of jumping at all of those things. So to be thrown
Yeah.
onto live TV straight away, it was like a deer in the headlights. And
Yeah.
yeah, I had some amazing people around me to sort of look after me. And then over that next year, it was about really crafting my story, my keynote, finding the messages that I wanted to share with the world as well, with the young
Yeah.
people. Like talk to, with the corporates I get to talk to, and pulling out the
Mm-hmm.
mess my journey that can resonate, you know, with someone who's never picked up a surf ski, who might not
Yeah.
love the ocean, but there's themes in the journey like resilience, your team, actually growing as a female in an all-male environment and learning to lead. There's a lot of
Yeah.
themes in, I think, are universal.
Yeah, definitely. So thinking of the whole experience from start to finish, like picking up that book, getting the initial idea, the planning, the journey itself, going back to normal life after, what would you say was actually the most difficult part of that whole thing, start to finish?
Yeah, it's it's such a crazy thing to think, because the whole way around there was a challenge almost in every area.
Yeah.
I think, to be honest, one of my lowest days was once we crossed the Gulf of Carpentaria and we came back into contact with my husband and Ben on land crew. And so many times I simply didn't know what to say to Matt when we reconnected. There was just this a divide between us almost, because my crew and I had experienced so much out at sea in these few weeks that I didn't have the words to describe it. All he really wanted was a hug and just me to tell him what had happened. And he never ever put pressure on me for anything else, but I felt like I couldn't be a wife. And so I was really hard on myself for that too. And you know, as I write about in the book, I didn't know if our relationship was actually going to make the distance. So this person who had sacrificed so much just to get me to the start line, who was on land, who was fearful the whole time, we weren't able to contact each other. I think that was the most challenging thing for me. But there was a beautiful moment the night before the finale of the paddle where we went out for dinner as a crew, and Matt actually sort of disappeared and we were all waiting for him. And he appeared at the door, and behind him he had the cruising Kiwis and the gold diggers, you know, my guardian angels of the West. He'd flown them in especially for me on that day. And I just looked at him and it was like falling in love again. And the way that we reunited, and it made our relationship so much stronger, that I think you can go through anything together and come back stronger at the end. And it took some time to do that, but eventually I was able to write that book, and I wrote it for him as much as anyone, to tell him everything that had happened, that at the time I simply didn't have the words. So I was really proud of that. And he said he got emotional reading it too, because he just didn't know what we were going through. So I think that relationship strain was one of the hardest parts, but also one of the most beautiful times was the reuniting at the end.
Yeah, that's the part I cried at.
Again, universe, right? Like everyone can relate to that, the feeling of love, that feeling of, you know, going through a hard time of long distance relationships, like so many people have had that before, and just feeling that divide with your loved one and trying to fix it, like all those sorts of things.
Yeah. Like it started when he had like got Courtney on the jet ski. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then it's like, you know, then the whole story, I won't give too much away, but like, at the dinner, and then everyone comes in, and then it started. So beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that was the most challenging. So if we now flip it and look at start to finish, everything all together, what was the most rewarding part?
The most rewarding part, I think, throughout the journey, I always say Door Island. I always say Door Island. I never hesitate with that, because that once we crossed that Great Australian Bight, I knew we were going to do it. I knew we were going to do it. I knew that there was nothing that could stand in our way that was tougher than that stretch of water who threw everything at us. And I always say us and we, because my crew was so important to get me through that. But it was truly getting to this island. And I actually paddled into the island firstly at nighttime. You know, the moon had come out, the sun had gone down, and I paddled in. It was the first time I'd set foot on sand in a couple of weeks. And I can't tell you, when you vomit continuously for 2 weeks, you lose 8 kilograms from seasickness, what it's like to feel still again. And I just remember sinking to my knees and just laying there for a moment and feeling the ground underneath me, and thinking, I sometimes wondered if I'd ever feel that again. And just that moment of raw emotion and even the stopping, it was finally letting it go. So I will always see Door Island as a pivotal moment of the journey and an absolute highlight, because I think across that 2 weeks, I put bricks in the wall of resilience, and my level of resilience was so much further above than when I'd started. And I think that was truly the time when I completely let go of that need for external validation. It was all internal at that stage.
Wow, incredible. Now, in the introduction, I did say that you are a dietitian. That's what you went to university for. And before the expedition, you had 3 very, very successful dietetics clinics. Have you gone back to practicing?
I've got one clinic that I held on to. So I had a replacement dietitian come in. She was amazing. And now I'm back in that one clinic. So at the moment, I only have the time to do 1 day a week in clinic. I love keeping a door of that whole world. I get to see people who, might have allergies, intolerances. I get to see athletes. I get to see elderly people who really need to put on weight. I need to get people who have newly diagnosed diabetes. It's just such a rewarding thing to do, and I love giving back. And I've also been coaching nippers for the past few years, which finally I have to give up because the speaking and other commitments are just a bit too much. But I think there'll always be that part of me that loves to help others. And I feel like the dietetic is the way that I can continue to do that whilst working on these other projects and sharing my journey at a greater level.
Yeah, I think coaching the nippers is something that you needed at that time, wasn't it? Like I remember you writing about what was it, the low that comes after, completing a big kind of athletic event. And that the opportunity to coach came at the perfect time. So it kind of is like full circle now, the fact that, now maybe it's your time to finish doing that. But it was something that I think really saved you at that moment.
Oh, it's so absolutely true. Coming back, I had dozens of messages from ultra endurance athletes saying, be careful of the low. Be careful of the low that can happen when you've been on a high for so long. You've got to keep yourself mentally and physically stimulated. I got a call from Mermaid Beach Surf Club saying, can you come and coach our nippers? I'd never intended to go back to nipper coaching. I had a quick think and I said, yes. Yes, I will. And I can tell you that 10-year-olds don't care that you have a world record. They will keep you on your toes. So it was just having this amazing group of kids to just keep my feet on the ground, to give me, that routine, to actually get me back in the ocean as well, swimming around with them and paddling with them. And they're just so beautiful, and they have taught me so much. And I always tell the story that I had some of my 10-year-old boys, and they were in a race, and these boys have trained really hard. They're the best in the country for their age, and they were in a race, and the whole race came behind them on a wave and went past them. And this was in the board rescue, which is 2 people on a board, for those who don't know. So they're coming back to shore. They're in front. They should have won. The whole race came through and they came like 6th. And I said at the end, I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, boys, about that. Was really unlucky. And these 10-year-olds looked at me and said, oh, well, that's the way it goes sometimes, doesn't it? And this was from 10-year-olds to have that perspective. And I just thought, moment, I think my heart melted, because I was like, if 10-year-olds can have that attitude to go, they knew they deserved that race. They'd trained so hard, they were the best. But to say they can't control that, they can only do what they can, and they did their best on that day. And it might not be enough to get that medal, but all we can do is our best on any given day. That's the sort of thing from my couple of years in coaching the mermaid nippers. I'm grateful for them.
Yeah. So what's your new daily routine look like now?
Totally. Yeah. Every day's a little different at the moment. So we had the world premiere of Diamond of the Sea, which is my documentary. Today, basically a bit of media, of course, talking to you. I'll always make sure every day that I do a bit of exercise. That's really important for me. So even if that's a walk, a run, or best case scenario, getting in the ocean, that will always come into my day. So I will always make sure I fit that in somewhere. I then normally in the morning, I'll start and get back to my emails. That's always top of the list, obviously prioritizing different things, a bit of media, And then I actually have my French lesson this afternoon. So I've just started learning French, which I feel is my
Amazing.
new challenge. And it is very challenging. I didn't study at school. I'm a complete rookie. So that's coming in
Yeah.
a couple of times a week.
Mhm.
And then basically now with this documentary, it's about getting it out on a greater level. So we
Yeah.
have news about streaming for that soon. So at the
Yes. Okay, good.
whole bunch of meetings and media trying to get this story out there and finalize this streaming platform. So I usually do corporate speaking a couple of times a week as well. I'll either travel to Sydney or Melbourne, or often it's here locally on the Gold Coast as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, so bit of exercise, a little bit of filling my own cup up as well, which is spending time with Matt doing my French lessons. And then around
Yeah.
that, it's my meetings and corporate
Yeah.
speaking.
Yeah, that's really cool. Actually, I was going to ask you about if you're planning on getting the documentary out, because my husband asked last night when I told him I was interviewing you, because like I've been so excited talking about your journey, and he asked if where he could watch it, and I said I don't know yet. I'll have to ask and see where, like, if it's going to be coming out on platforms. So that'll be really good.
Yep, next couple of weeks we're going to have all the news for that, which I'm so excited
Cool.
about. And yeah, Jack Lawrence from Stamp Productions did the documentary, and just the way he's managed to craft the story and bring
Yeah.
out all of those emotions. And basically the theatre was sort of had the tissues out, which is what we were trying to kind of bring at the end, just that raw emotion
Yeah.
and what it
Yeah.
took this thing done.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, the expedition, you did it to raise money for a charity as well, which is Gotcha for Life. So it's a not-for-profit foundation dedicated to building a mentally fit future. And you raised, it was 100K, wasn't it? That you managed to
Yeah,
reach. That was your goal?
120,000 in the end, so
Yeah,
100K was the
wow.
goal. I was thrilled to get there. I didn't think I thought it was too lofty of a goal, but it was just incredible because everyone who was donating, they're going to the website. They're not only giving funds that go into life-saving workshops to build mental fitness, but they're actually reading what Gotcha for Life is about. It was founded by Gus Warland, who lost a friend to suicide, and he wanted
Mhm.
to do something about this almost epidemic we have of, poor mental health. And through COVID, I was reading that anxiety
Mm.
and depression were going up. The youth suicide rate was increasing. I thought, that's the charity I need to help. That's the charity I need
Yeah.
to, contribute to. And what's come full circle, I'm an ambassador for them now. I speak to students at schools about mental
Mhm.
fitness. And that might be as simple as learning who to go to when you're struggling, learning what
Yeah.
to say if a friend comes to you or where to refer them to. It
Great.
might be a couple of simple things for young kids, and then more
Yeah.
complex or, detailed strategies as they get older, but you're never too young
Yeah.
to start working on your mental fitness.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like we never had these discussions at school, did we? It wasn't until I think it was when Mark passed away in our year, and then that's when they got counselors in. I wasn't
Yeah,
even at John Paul then. I was over at Czech, and
yeah.
I obviously was, he was in our year, so like we were kind of a part of it. But yeah, I don't think we had any conversations around mental health and staying mentally fit. So I think it's really incredible that that's something that, is now happening.
It's amazing. And you see these young kids, they're incredibly empowered, they're incredibly switched on, and they ask the questions. They're not afraid to
Yeah.
ask questions. And it's an amazing generation that we're seeing growing up in this day and age. They're very socially aware of the environment as well as mental
Yeah.
health. I think they're the two
Hmm.
things, and they take the time to invest and build their own knowledge. It's a fascinating generation. I'm really excited about the future, and they're
Yeah.
the change makers. I tell you, there's amazing things coming.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say that when I talk about whether it's politics or whatever it is, social change, things like that, in any country, actually, is that I think it's the younger generations that are going to bring the change because they have the fresh minds. They're the ones that they're, I think, more open to change. Older generations aren't open to change. It's just, I think, just the mentality of being at that age and not wanting to change.
And even things like global warming, these kids are like, well,
Yeah.
that'll affect us. They're actually at the age where it'll affect them. So,
Yeah.
it's the mental health epidemic as well.
Mm.
They see it affect those around them. So it's exciting, and it's an honor to help them in that.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are your future plans with Gotcha for Life? So you're doing like speaking kind of, what would
Yeah.
you call it? Not events, like speaking
Yeah,
commitments?
workshops.
Workshops. Okay.
Yeah, there are some events too. I actually do a few Q&A panels at a few different events representing Gotcha for Life. But basically over the next month, I think I've got around 10 to 12 sort of workshops. I'll travel back
Wow.
and forth to Sydney doing those.
Yeah.
A lot of them in high schools, but they've just started a
Great.
primary school program as well, which is really
Wow. That's
special.
incredible.
Right. So we'll go in, maybe one or two of us presenters speak to a large group or take them in smaller groups and talk
Mhm.
all about mental fitness for that time, the time of a lesson,
Yeah.
and then give them some key takeaways. Yeah. And then while I'm down there, we usually do another school the next day. We've got an association with Surf Life Saving New South Wales. So we talk to
Oh,
surf
cool.
clubs as well, which again, Surf Life Saving, it's a very traditional organization. We never had access to any of this growing up. It's never even
Yeah.
been talked about amongst the lifesavers. So it's
Yeah.
really cool, and I think it's groundbreaking sort of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So to finish up, big question for everyone, well, advice from you. Having achieved so much and overcoming such significant challenges, what advice would you give to someone who is setting out to tackle their own big dreams?
Totally. I think whatever that thing is that you want to do. So when I made this documentary, when I wrote this book, I really wanted to get that message across that I'm not particularly special. I'm not naturally gifted. As I said, I never imagined myself doing these things. I just was prepared to work harder than anyone else to get it. And I think that message there is that truly, if you want to do anything and you believe that you can, firstly, find the right people around you, know who your crew is, know those people you can talk to, because times will get tough. If you're taking on any big challenge, there will be challenges within that.
Mm-hmm.
Know your crew, do your research, talk to the people who are in the know, who are experts in the field, and
Yeah.
then go for it. Absolutely go for it. And there's a quote I love that you don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great. So there's never a
Yeah.
perfect time. You have to get started. And on the first day of this paddle, I did 73K. That was the max I could do. I was laying on the back deck in agony. By the last day of this paddle, I did 235 kilometers. I just started and I was in so much pain, but I knew that every day things would get easier. So
Mm.
whatever that goal is, start small, build your way towards it, have your crew, do your research, and just go out and get it, because everyone
Yeah.
has that thing they want to do. It's on their bucket list and they put it off for so many different reasons. I had that
Mm-hmm.
why and why nots list, and the why nots was pages long. Just know that one reason, the why, that's all you need to get started.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love it. Great advice. Before we finish up, I want to tell you my favorite part of the book was when you were going into shore in Preston Beach. You were running low on jet ski fuel, and then some drunk man came up with his wife and started helping you out. Then all of a sudden, the whole community came out. To be honest, when I saw the drunk man come up, I panicked a bit for you. I thought, oh my God, are they going to get like mobbed on the beach or something? And then like the
Absolutely.
community came out because Matt had put out a help post in the community group. And
I
I
know.
feel like that just really encompasses Aussie culture. I was like,
It,
this is Australian culture.
that is Australian culture. And we have this culture where people will help strangers just because they believe it's the right thing to do. And I love
Yeah.
that Australian culture. And I remember getting to shore. I didn't know where I was. It was almost pitch black dark. We basically had to float into the shore with no fuel left. The jet ski had fallen on top of us. And I looked up the beach and I saw the figures of 30 people in the dark, and I thought I was imagining things. And it was the
Yeah.
press community, like you said, Matt had put out a call for help, and they all came. They didn't need to. They didn't know me. They didn't know Matt. And it's an
Yeah.
absolutely beautiful part of our country. And I love it
Yeah.
so, so much. And it's a perfect
Yeah.
example.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So by the time this episode comes out, hopefully we'll have more of an update on the documentary if we can watch it on a streaming platform. So if we do, I'll include that link in the episode description. As for the book, where have you got it? It's on, I know it's on Amazon. Where else have you got it for sale?
Totally. So across Australia and New Zealand, it's available as a paperback, and globally, it's available as an audiobook and an ebook. So Booktopia in Australia, or Amazon online, or you can go through HarperCollins. Any of those places, sold through a whole bunch of independent retailers, but Booktopia and Amazon will probably have your best prices. I recorded the audiobook myself, so it's all my own voice telling
Amazing.
those, and that's on Audible as well with the audiobook.
Yeah. Did you find doing the audiobook, you started to get emotional reading it out loud again?
100%. When I did the dedications at the end, I had to hold it together, particularly in the last line where it's dedicated to Matt. And I basically that it took me 12,700 kilometers to realize that my favorite adventure is anyone where I'm with you. And in saying that, I had to hold it together. I had one producer man over in the studio, and I'm just there, holding these tears back. But
amazing.
I really wanted to just dedicate it to all of the people that were in my corner from the very start, and he sure was one. So
yeah, incredible. Well, thank you so much for coming today. It's been amazing. I think this has been my favorite interview yet.
Such a pleasure. So good to chat again. As to everyone again, Amanda and I went to school together. We did surf life saving together. So this has been just an incredible catch up and talk about things coming full circle.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just saying before the recording that I did surf life saving for a different club. So Bonnie was like the competitor. She was like the one that people would say, you've got to beat Bonnie, you've got to beat Bonnie. And like, yeah, it's just really incredible just to see like the achievements you've made, because like I've seen that competitive side of you. I know kind of, even though we weren't at the same club, like these are just things that I've seen. Gosh, when did I moved to Whoopi when I was like 8, started surf club pretty much straight away. So like we've been competing from that young age. And then we started high school together at like 12 or 13. To kind of see that and know that you have this competitive nature and this kind of spirit, but seeing how hard you've worked through it all, incredible.
Hard work will get you anywhere. And I think the other one is just having those people in your corner that empower you, right? Like, the opportunity we had to be at the beach, competing and training, and even through sport, we had an incredibly empowering and supportive environment. So important to have those people in your corner, just telling you.
Yep. All right. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure. Thank you.